So I think we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us for another one of our round tables. For those of you who are new to these events, welcome and a little bit of context. Over the past 3 years, whilst championing and implementing wellbeing at work across very different organisations, I became more and more aware that people and HR leaders hold the space for pretty much everyone else. They hold the space for their people. They hold the space for their peers on the leadership team. And of course, they hold the space for the people at home and within their families, their friends, and within their communities. And yet, they themselves are often left with little or no support. So these events were originally convened in person, of course, to give people and HR leads a safe and confidential space to share, to discuss, and to learn about well-being and inclusion challenges, to look at the challenges that they faced as leaders and as individuals. Today's session is perhaps a little bit different from previous events because A, it's been an open invitation to anyone that's interested in supporting people. So thank you all for joining. And B, the event itself is going to be more of a fireside chat with 3 women who I admire and respect deeply. I admire and respect them personally and professionally. And the reason it's a fireside chat is because this is not about talking at you or at you. It is an opportunity to reassure each and every one of us, myself included, that we're not alone and that we do have support and allies for our current challenges. Now, some of you have already kindly shared your questions for the panelists. Thank you. For the rest of you, please do use the Q&A function and keep the questions coming. This next hour is an opportunity for you to take what you need and feel absolutely free to leave the rest. Now, I think I can speak for all of us that professionally, not one of us has faced a year like this. Furlough, economic uncertainty, lockdown restrictions, homeschooling, digital and technological adoption, civil and political unrest, burnout, physical and mental health challenges, well-being and diversity on the agenda, well-being and diversity off the agenda, Zoom bombing and Zoom fatigue. It's been quite a year. However, I do think that our current experiences could also represent the industrial revolution of our age. Exactly 12 months ago, we convened our first round table. In very different circumstances. It was an in-person event in central London with some great avocado toast. And at that event, we talked about the need for robust and aligned well-being and inclusion strategies. We talked about the importance of open and empathetic workplace cultures. We talked about the future of work needing to encompass flexible working. Now, I could pretend that I had a crystal ball, but far from it. At that time, little did I realise that that Wednesday in Soho would be the last time that I saw my team in person, that my whole work and business would need to pivot online, that I would spend months without seeing loved ones, that I would be having conversations with my accountant on what furlough meant, or that mental health, far from being taboo, became a pillar of pretty much every conversation that I would have with clients, with friends, and even with strangers in the park. And from all of the conversations that I've had over the past year, all of the books and articles I have read, all of the media reports that I have consumed, there is one newspaper article from last summer that really stuck with me. This really gave me pause for thought. And what I took away from this is, what can we learn from the past 12 months? How will history view our decisions? This is why we've convened today's sessions. I think that each and every one of us can learn from the past 12 months. And whatever our roles, doesn't matter however junior they are, however senior they are, whether we are job hunting, whether we are employed, whether we are self-employed, we, each and every one of us, have agency to inform the future of work. And so on that note, I'd like to introduce you to our three phenomenal panelists. We've got Carmel Bawa, the news editor at Schneider Electric, who I've known for a number of years since our time at WPP. Rhiannon Staples, the CMO at HiBob. HiBob have been a real champion of our work at Happy Maven from pretty much day one. So thank you, Rhiannon. And Nicole Ribeau, who's from Brunswick, the Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity and the Head of Recruiting. Nicole, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Suki, and thanks to everyone joining us today. It's really kind of you all to take time out of your busy lives to sit with us. I've got the pleasure of sitting with these three fantastic ladies. Suki, thank you for the introductions, really kind. I don't thank you for mentioning avocado toast, because now I'm starving and I can't get that out of my head. So I'm just going to go with it. I'm Nicole Ribeau. I'm a partner at Brunswick Group. I'm based in our New York office. I am the firm's global head of inclusion and diversity, and I also lead recruiting for Brunswick Group in the Americas. Just a very top line. If you don't know who Brunswick Group is, we are a global advisory firm. We work with our clients on critical issues. We sit at the intersection of the financial, the social, and the corporate. We've got 24 offices, we're 1,000+ people, and all of that good stuff. But what's really interesting to know about how this sort of connects to me is that I have not had the most planful career, but it's been the most fun. And that's very odd for a headhunter to kind of admit that, as I'm often giving people advice on their careers. I started out in clinical and counseling psychology with my mindset on being a therapist. And then I somehow tripped into the corporate world, into executive search, and built a career in executive search and talent acquisition. Over the past, how many, 15, 20 years. So that's a little bit about where I am now, and I guess what I am now. But the how piece for me is also equally important, which is that I was born in London. My parents immigrated to London from Jamaica in the early 60s, and I moved to New York at a very, very young age. So I've now counted that I've lived half my life in the US, half my life in the UK, and my accent pretty much mirrors that, because it's somewhere in between, but as long as you can understand me, that's great. But that sort of immigrant experience that runs through a couple of generations of my family is really an important part of how I approach my professional life and what I do. I feel very open to ambiguity, which I'm going to come to in a minute, but open to opportunity, and not always knowing what exactly is around the corner, but walking towards it with hope, faith, and just a belief that things will kind of come right. So with all of that, it sounds like I'm really well set up to handle a pandemic. Absolutely not. So in terms of what Suki was asking, what I've learned about myself in this past year, I'll be honest with you all, I'm really still processing. I kind of feel like the life lessons I'm being taught right now, maybe I'll understand those, in time to come. But in the processing bit, to answer the question, with my interest in psychology and the human condition generally, as I said, I thought I was pretty well versed in dealing with ambiguity, but this year has completely pushed that for me personally, professionally, physically, in my person, to places that I didn't think I would ever see or experience. And then I also, think as a Black woman, watching inequality just overflow in terms of racial injustice, climate injustice, social injustice, and have it all converge and to an exponential degree, has been a lot to contain. Not that we can ever contain this, really. And I think that's what I'm really learning, is that I don't have to contain it all, and I think that that's okay. And I think being vulnerable basically means that, you're in touch with the fact that we are just who we are. We can't make ourselves into Superwoman or what have you, as much as I love the outfit. We are just who we are. And I think that's what I'm still learning, is that vulnerability is absolutely fine. It's okay to be in that space for perhaps long periods of time, and people will join you there. It's what Carmel was talking about. If you open it up, build it, they will come. And that's what I'm learning and still learning this year. And also get a good therapist. So I will end right there.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you. There's so much there I want to unpack, but time for a different call. Rhiannon, over to you.
I don't know how I got so lucky to be here with you women. This is probably as helpful for me as it might be for our participants, I hope. The opportunity to learn and speak with each of you is such a blessing. So thank you, Suki, for arranging this call for us and for those that are participating. As you mentioned, I'm the CMO at HiBob. I have in fact been there for a year and a half. HiBob is a people management platform provider based out of Tel Aviv, with a large presence in the UK and in the US. And when I found the company a year and a half ago, I really felt like I had found a new home. I've been a B2B marketing leader in high growth tech companies for the better part of my career. And I've really been focused on starting with organizations that are building for scale. And I saw that opportunity here at HiBob, but it was more than that. I saw the opportunity to join an organization that understood that there was change that was happening. You mentioned the future of work, Suki, in the beginning of this conversation. When I joined and sat with the CEO originally, we talked about what the future of work looked like. And it was all those things that you discussed last year over avocado toast. And the future of work is now. It's happening. 2020 thrust us into this place that forced adaptation really quickly. Some companies have done it really well. Some are still in the midst. Some really don't have a clue yet how they're managing this. I couldn't be more excited to be part of a company that really had built technology designed for this. We didn't have to pivot when the pandemic hit in 2020 and all of us shifted to remote work, because we had seen the writing on the wall, so to speak, not the pandemic. We also didn't have that crystal ball, but we understood that the expectations of employees and the expectations of what HR leaders need to bring to their companies and to their team was changing as the landscape of the employee profile changed, and what employees were expecting from their employers was changing. And all of that's really come to a head now over the course of the past 12 months. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be part of this organization that's helping provide a solution to the challenges of collaboration and productivity and communication that so many businesses are struggling with as all of their employees are remote. I had to have a good think about what I've learned about myself over the past 12 months. I've learned some really mundane things that I won't go into. And I don't think I speak for myself when I say that the big takeaway for me, I think I probably speak for all of us on this call, is that we're a lot more resilient than we think and than we give ourselves credit for. It is okay to struggle through this. It is hard, but we don't break. We're still here and we're still pushing through. And that's what's so important. If somebody had told me 12 months ago the weight that each of us would be carrying, I think each of us would have laughed, like there's no way I could handle it. But yet we are. We're still managing to uphold our careers. We're still managing to manage our households. We're still pushing forward, hopefully taking care of ourselves in the process. Whether we acknowledge it or not, whether it feels easy or not, we have all built an amazing sense of resilience over this past year. And to Nicole's point, we'll walk away with skills and abilities that we didn't even know we had in us going forward. So that's what I've taken away from the past 12 months.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon. I could quite happily just have a conversation with the three of you, but I'm going to go into some of the questions that had come in advance, and I can already see that questions are coming in on the Q&A. Please keep sending them in. So Rhiannon, I'm going to ask you the first question. You've just said HiBob didn't need to pivot, but how has the past, well, especially the pandemic, but how has the last 11 months affected how the organization operates?
Yeah, so we drink our own Merlot for sure. and using the technology internally. So a couple of major takeaways. First and foremost, communications had to evolve. We used to have daily stand-ups in the office in person. We're now replicating that on Zoom. We used to have standard work schedules that most people adhered to with some sort of core hours. The reality is, as a business, like most of the companies that we work with, we had to adapt. Not everyone could be online 9 to 5 or standard working hours if they were juggling childcare or elder care. That option didn't exist. So communication and how we communicate amongst ourselves had to change, and also how we communicate as a leadership team to our people and listening more. We always talk about employee satisfaction surveys, employee health, employee well-being surveys has become part of the conversation here internally at HiBob, and I know for many of our clients as well. And that's part of communication as well, listening and putting an ear to the ground to really understand how people are evolving and how they're doing. We also have shifted the conversation from tasks to goals. One of the big challenges a lot of businesses are facing right now is, how do I drive productivity when everybody's dispersed and I can't see what people are doing? It's really forcing an evolution in how we manage people and how we interact. So by focusing on outcomes rather than outputs, we've really changed the way that we operate the business and the way that we can show and demonstrate flexibility for employees whilst at the same time still serving the needs of the business.
And so for me, it wasn't until I was maybe a couple of months in that I started organizing calls with ex-team members, et cetera, and getting into the swing of things. And there was this one particular time, so sorry, I'm going to try and keep this short, but I don't know what happened. And I guess there was a vibe, but I literally looked at them and I asked them and I said, how are you? And a lot of stuff had been going on. You'd be communicating on so many things that COVID had been affecting people on. And I just asked her, I said, how are you? And she was super honest. And, she was like, do you know what, Karma, I'm not doing great. And that was it. That was my opportunity. I literally just took my mask off. And I was like, for the first time, I literally said, do you know what, I'm not okay either. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is what I learned from myself in the past 12 months is that trust that I totally try and advise people to get from, being authentic, etc. You have to bring it into yourself. Because after that, I was just so much more motivated, and I've always been motivated anyway, but it just tuned something off that I could trust my colleagues, with how I'm feeling, not only from a work perspective, but a person perspective. And kind of that helped me get on with my day-to-day work. But yeah, so take your mask off, literally, not just the mask that you have to wear in COVID, but that was it. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Carmel, and thank you so much for sharing and opening up for the actual topic. Thank you. And Rhiannon, you said something that's very close to my heart about polling. So to be doing those surveys. Nicole, may I ask you, have you continued to solicit that feedback to poll your people? And if you have, what do you then do with the results?
Yeah, I think it's such a good part of the being an inclusive and vulnerable leader is the listening portion. I think people really want to be heard. And I think at our firm, we're very relationship driven. We used to gather a lot in person and socialize. And a lot of that is about building trust and a high level of intimacy. And when that was removed, because, we just physically couldn't do that anymore, we sort of relied on those old bonds that were there, but realized that, that's not adequate. We had to do more to sort of take the temperature and proactively understand how people were feeling and thinking. So we continued with our, we had a global IND survey this past year. We've had our employee satisfaction survey. We've had other channels, formal, whether focus groups around certain identities, whether it's women or people of color. We've also engage the firm generally in matters around basically bringing your authentic self to work. We're just creating many, many touch points for people to feel comfortable expressing themselves. It may be a survey might be more appealing for someone who's less able to kind of speak up in public. It might be that someone looks at a survey and says, no way, I want to talk to leadership. So we've just been really trying to create these virtual forums, which is really new for us because we relied on in-person meetings as a way to, get feedback. So long shall that continue, alongside whatever we get back to in our new future normal. I think the exercise of listening through different channels will always continue. And then what we do with that after is really another powerful part of the equation. It's actually action. You know, I think everyone knows in any relationship that you had, I've come to you and spoken from the heart. I've told you how I'm feeling. And then to do nothing about it, you rather say nothing. I mean, I certainly feel the same way in my marriage. You know, you want to be heard and you want someone to change their behavior. So I think that's really important for us as an organization. We've done a lot of listening, and now is the time to act. It might be changing policies, changing procedures. You know, it's really acting on what we've heard.
Thank you. And yes, the action is the key bit. And Carmel, may I bring you in here? In response to feedback that you've had, and of course, in response to the challenges of the last year, how have you shifted or adapted your team goals?
So I think in regards to our team goals, what we focused on and you know, following the feedback that we did get was Schneider was seen as an essential business. So, you know, things from hospital, data centers, etc. And all of our employees were carried on working, whether they were connected or they weren't. So for us, from a company perspective, it was putting the trust within, not just, you know, as it were, putting the trust within the local teams. They knew what works really well for us, and also showcasing what they were doing. So we put things in place such as our hero stories initiatives, where we would, you know, speak to our local teams and find out what they were doing. And the purpose of that was not to communicate it externally. Our focus was on our people, you know, our people's well-being. And I think that's how our strategy and focus changed last year. Obviously, it's always been about the people, but we wanted to focus on them and their well-being. And in order to do that, we wanted to hunker down, find out what they were doing, and communicate these feel-good stories within Schneider. Do you know what I mean? You know, and it was not about tooting our horn externally, but more of, these are what you guys are doing. This is what your community is doing. This is what you're, you know, what you're doing from a community perspective, whether it's volunteering or from, you know, an actual commercial company perspective. And we really leaned heavily on that well-being piece, and it came back to us, you know, people really wanted to hear more stories. They didn't want silence, whatever it was, you know, from whatever, whether it was region, country, or from a global aspect. They wanted to know what was going on strategically, but also on the ground. And we made sure, you know, just as what was said previously with Rhiannon and Nicole, that we did that from the various channels that we already had in place.
And that leads me to my next question for all three of you. I'll let you choose which order you take it in. If back in March 2020, you'd known that this period of upheaval was going to last so long, I think we're looking at probably at least another 12 months. What do you think you would have done differently had you known that timescale?
Right, Suki, so you're just going for the easy stuff today. Okay, fair enough. Okay. Well, I'll be honest. There are probably 3 restaurants and 2 trips I would have crammed in from the 15th of March to the 1st of April. I'm not going to lie. And then after that, I think, you know, the first thing that came to my mind, honestly, were those moments in April with my team, you know, and I'm sure everyone on the webinar can sort of empathize, where, you know, if you're leading with inclusion and vulnerability, you know, you feel that you're a peer, but you're also here to add something and help guide, you know. And I probably would have encouraged more time to decompress, which I did. You know, I said, look, I probably would have doubled that because I think people were very keen to, which is what anxiety does. You know, you're very keen to kind of get back into something that is recognizable and predictable and all of that, and make order out of chaos. I probably would have encouraged, you know, sitting a little bit more with the chaos, which kind of we had to anyway. But if I'd known sort of how long, I probably would have said, you know what, actually, it's going to be a while. So just sort of lean into this and don't feel so eager to get everything sort of in order so quickly.
Yeah, Nicole, I'll echo that sentiment. You know, the notion of leaning into it. I think retrospectively, I could have been a little bit more. I could have embraced the opportunity a bit more to take advantage of some of the unique benefits of this time, whether it be with our immediate family. So the chance to, you know, hunker down with my kids has been such a blessing during this time. It's, you know, surely stressful having them home so often and so much of them all at once. But this notion of really just finding the peace of mind to embrace that. I also know that a lot of folks, you know, who are fortunate enough have taken the opportunity to do things they wouldn't have otherwise done, like moving into a different locale for a couple of months or finding a different homestead to temporarily work from, thinking that this would be over rather quickly. I didn't take those risks. In hindsight, I wish I would have.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Carmel.
Oh, thank you. I think for me, done differently in the 18 months. I think it's something that I've learned along the way and learning from over the couple of years. But for me personally, I think it would be being present more at home. I think we're always constantly running, and I think that's something that taught us last year, you know, but maybe starting that a bit earlier, you know, being present more, you know, just chilling for that time being, and echoing what Rhiannon and Nicole said, and just living in the moment. I think from a professional perspective, I think I would want that more for the teams that I work with as well, and putting regular things in place, you know, that we can catch up informally, you know, yeah, and just, you know, get to know each other from a different perspective, maybe outside of work, even if it's on Zoom or even if it's on, you know, whatever channel that we're using.
Thank you, Carmel. And I think that taking that pause, I think, is absolutely critical, because we go straight into a place of action, but that period for reflection to actually build that in. That leads me to my next question, which I'm going to direct, well, I'm going to open it up to all three of you, but I'm going to direct it at Rhiannon, because I know you also work with people teams for lots of businesses. Over the past 11 months, how have the conversations with your peers in the leadership team or with other businesses changed over the past year?
Yeah, I think what we've seen in our own organization, as well as the organizations we work with for sure, is HR has been thrust into the front seat, if you will. They've got a key seat at the leadership table right now, and the business really turned to this function and these teams during this pandemic for guidance on how do we make this shift, how do we operate. And nobody had the playbook for this. Nobody was prepared for this. So that was a monumental shift, surely, I think, for HR leaders of all kinds. And in our leadership team, I know the conversation has really evolved, as we started to talk about before, focus on well-being and connection. You know, the conversations on a weekly basis amongst the leadership team aren't just about the numbers and how the business is performing and what some of the challenges are, but a real pause to understand how the well-being of our employees is, what we are doing to foster well-being, making sure that we're helping our teams manage through this time. And most importantly, thinking about how we empower managers in the business to help their employees. You know, there's a recognition that we've experienced as a leadership team, and again, many of the companies we work with, that most managers are not prepared to lead with empathy. Most managers have not been trained to manage a team that's dispersed in remote locations whilst trying to handle healthcare issues, stress, anxiety, childcare, etc. So the role of HR has also changed to be an enabling function in the business, and thinking differently about how to find purpose and support for your frontline workers. That is different than the dialogue we were having 18 months ago.
Thank you, Rhiannon. And you've just used a word that's so close to my heart, empathy. And of course, yes, if we haven't equipped our line managers, we haven't equipped our leadership with that skill. Carmel, do you think we're now going to see more empathetic leadership styles?
I think from my perspective, I definitely think that. I think it's, I think, as I mentioned before, I think it definitely, I think people want to know and they want to hear from genuine and authentic leaders, as well as, and that's from a comms perspective, as well as a, as well as a leadership perspective. Whatever they're communicating, they want to hear the genuine, real deal. What does it mean for them? And what does it mean for their leaders as well? I think that's super important in not just the environment that we were in last year and where we're going into now, but it's been exacerbated because of that. And I think, you do look up to your leadership, whether it's, in the leadership of your CEO, whether it's in the leadership of your country president, your country leader, or even your direct manager. That type of communications, genuine, authentic comms, need to be filtered through everything that you are talking about, and you all need to be on the same page. And I think that's something that is a great comms approach. If everyone's on the same page, if you've got the same type of trust inbuilt between everyone, that genuine comms will then filter down into your culture, your working culture. And I think it's more important now more than ever. And it will carry on going forward. I don't think that's going to filter out. I mean, I guess the question is, would we be talking about this before a year ago? I think yes, we definitely would. But again, it's been exacerbated by last year, and the question, I guess, is, it's all good when it is a headline, right? I mean, but the point is, and I think it's been detailed in today, how can we act upon it? How can we find out more of what people want? How can we act upon it? And I think it's things like, changing policies within your organization, like Rhiannon was talking about. For example, last year, I think, Schneider, we had a family global leave policy, but because of COVID, we extended some particular leave as part of that policy. And I think a lot of companies, they're thinking about doing this, and they're thinking about extending the leave if you have been affected or a family member's been affected by COVID. But it has to be able to be it has to be fluid, and it has to be able to keep adapting to that. And so it's basically, walking the talk. Whatever you do hear from the ground, you're authentic and talking about it, you're listening, but you're actually walking the talk at the same time.
Thank you. You could not have lined me up better. And Nicole, I'm going to apologise in advance for another toughie in your direction. Are they walking the talk, or is it lip service? Whether we're talking about well-being at work, whether we're talking about posting a black square last summer, is this lip service?
Well, it can be. But I think that, to what Carmel and Rhiannon were saying, we've turned a corner now. There's kind of no going back. And I think that, and I feel this in myself. I have a huge amount of hope, really, that, we are moving beyond lip service to more authenticity. But I also know that that's a really hard journey. Even if you are a person that is open to, being able to say, hey, I'm struggling with this, knowing that will help someone else, either they will say it or they'll feel some sort of empathy, or, so it's not easy to kind of get to that place where you're, speaking from that position. But I think the tide has really turned. And I think people are, because of this backdrop of the pandemic and what I was talking about around racial, social, and climate injustice and inequality, we've created almost a perfect petri dish where no one can sort of escape the sense that things, need to change and move on. And I think that's really what the pandemic has amplified for people. So people are feeling uncomfortable, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But I do want to say that even like the most zen in the moment, people struggle with, being empathetic and authentic. So we as HR leaders or leaders in business have to do what we can to support everyone on their kind of individual journey to being more of their authentic self at work. And, some of that is through programs that I think, Carmel and Rhiannon were describing. Some of it is just, modeling that behavior yourself. But, it's not a straight line. But I do think, if you keep pushing the lip service, it's not going to work. People will tell you it's not going to work.
Thank you. And I've just invited my colleague Vanessa onto the panel. Vanessa, if you could turn your camera on and turn mute. And Vanessa's going to field the questions. Some great questions have come in on the Q&A.
Really good.
Yes, we've got some great questions today. Thank you for everyone who has submitted a question. I'm going to start with a question directed for Carmel. So, how do you reach out comms-wise to collect stories from a broad range of employees? Some organizations some organizations struggle to get engagement from some of their audiences, and it's important to hear from everyone. She says, this is from Sarah. She says, I love this, by the way.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Vanessa. And thank you, Sarah, for that question. So I think I've got the question right. It's working with such a broad array of employees. How do we engage with them to get their stories sent in to us and find out what's actually going on the ground? I think in regards to that, from a scenario perspective, and because we're quite broad and because we're based, connected, non-connected, as I spoke, it's quite complex. And I think that's with a few organizations, right? And what we did was we put things in place. So, for example, we have things like we have representatives, comms leads from country, from region. We have comms leads, let's say, from the business units. We have regular catch-ups with them all. So that's one example to find out, well, what's happening locally, because no one will know what's happening at more, than the person who's working within that country, within that division, etc. So we kind of put it in with the communications leads' hands to find out, well, what's going on, and then we rally together. I think it's bi-weekly, monthly, to find out, well, what are the latest stories, what's been happening, and then we use that kind of channel to find out more detail in regards to motivating people to send us those stories from an individual basis. I know that from a UK perspective, we use our various channels such as Yammer. But we also use things like, I don't know, our various channels are already in place. So, for example, we have a weekly country president call, we have a weekly message with them, and we promote. So once we promote someone's story, I think that's what then tinkers down to everyone else. Like, oh, I'd like to share what I've been doing. And it kind of promotes that kind of feeling of being valued, and that people will share more stories. So does that hopefully answer from our perspective how we do it at Schneider?
That's great, thank you. I've got a question here for Nicole. How do you negotiate vulnerability when a disability such as chronic migraines can sometimes affect your working performance? How do you allow yourself to be honest while not reducing your ability to professionally move forward?
I think it's a great question, and I think just asking the question, whomever asked the question out there, I can't see you, it's tough, but I just wanted to say, just by asking the question is a step forward in the right direction, because it's acknowledging, your or one's experience and putting it together. So you're on the verge of, making this something real for you. But I think in the way to answer it is, putting myself in that position, I think it's just, if you can be as honest and open as possible, I would go for it. And it might not always be, your immediate boss. You might have other allies in the organization that you might want to call on and talk to. It's kind of hard not knowing, where you work. But I think that we're at a stage, which is what we've been talking about. We've turned a corner now. We are asking people we work with to be their whole selves at work, and we cannot pick and choose what we feel comfortable dealing with when people are bringing their whole selves to work. And that includes any issues of physical, impairment or disability or pain. I think this year has taught us all that we are physically vulnerable. So I can't give you exact advice without, chatting about your organization, the culture, the dynamics, what that might mean for you, etc. But I do want you to feel empowered that, you're against a strong backdrop of people being able to hear your experience and accommodate it, and, find a way for you to have a strong lived experience at the company you're at. So, I would really just encourage you to, use that backdrop as a way to make yourself heard, if appropriate. I hope that makes sense. Gosh, I sound like a lawyer with all those caveats. I'm not. I've just been living in the US for too long. Sorry, Vanessa, go ahead.
Can
response.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Vanessa. I'm just going to interject with a great question from Yusuf. I'm going to direct this at Rhiannon, because I imagine that with a tech platform, I kind of imagine that some of your work has to be, what do they call it? Forecasting, that future thinking. So he or she has asked a great question. What are your thoughts on how COVID-19 has reshaped the future landscape on how organizations support their employees? And can you foresee what the world of work could look like in 5 years? And do you look forward to it?
Are you going to extend this by about 45 minutes? Because I can unpack.
I think so.
You want me to go for all of it? I love this question. Yeah, so I'm going to focus on 2 core areas because there's a lot there. But let me start by saying we fundamentally believe the future of work has changed forever, and the future of work is hybrid. We are not going back to the 9 to 5 in the office like we had before. Offices are not dead. Remote work as we've experienced it over the past year is not going to be what the future looks like. But we have learned, businesses and people alike, over the course of the past year, that remote work, dispersed teams can be productive. It can be satisfying to have that flexibility. It can be necessary to have that flexibility. And companies and people can still thrive despite the fact that we're not all in the office 9 to 5. So our ability to empower to train our people, our managers and employees on how to function effectively in a hybrid environment is really key to success in the future. How do you operate a meeting when half the people are in the room and half the people are outside of the room? How do you create feelings of engagement and connection amongst your employees if some of them are located within driving distance of a central office, and some of them have taken up a home that would require a flight to get to the office? This is the reality of the future. So I think in the future, offices will have purpose. They're not just a natural place for us to congregate, the default place for us to go to. The office space will have to have purpose, and will have to have a unique draw to bring people to the office. And I think that this upskilling of our leadership and future leaders is really going to be on how to, we mentioned it already, manage with empathy, because people expect that now. The barriers between work and home have been taken down. We see humans now, and we need, I think that we'll see a lot more vulnerability and empathy demonstrated in leadership in the future, because we've learned that this skill is really foundation for success, both personal and business. So I think that those 2 things combined, the focus on well-being and understanding the employee experience, is absolutely what we'll see in not 5 years, Joseph, but in the very near future. We're already experiencing it now. And that focus on building a workplace environment that fosters culture, engagement, collaboration, productivity, despite the fact that we're in separate locations. It's just a lot more flattening than we've already experienced over the course of the past 20 years.
Thank you, Rhiannon. And I think we can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No.
That I think there is this danger with economic uncertainty and a global recession that some companies will try to put inclusion or well-being or mental health conversations back in the bottle. But I don't think that that's actually going to be possible. Vanessa, back to you.
Thanks, Suki. I have a question here for Carmel from Izzy. How do you gauge what open and authentic communication looks like across different contexts? Is there ever a risk of being too vulnerable or oversharing as a leader? How do you strike the balance?
I think that's a great question. So thank you very much. Okay, so I think personally, this, from my perspective, it really depends on your audience. So you've always got to remember who your audience is, number one. And yes, I promote authentic stories, and speaking from the heart, but you've really got to know what works from a cultural perspective and the audience that you're working with. Something from the United Kingdom and Ireland, the tone, the structure, what you're going to talk about is not going to work the same if you were having, an audience in Hong Kong, or for example, even an audience in France. It really depends on knowing your audience, and things that you can put in place to understand your audience better are, have little focus groups, find out what their actual needs are. speak to them with focus groups. You could do a survey, but obviously everyone's got survey fatigue. Maybe you can find other ways of finding out, well, what's going to hit the ground. And it is trial and error, right? I'm not saying, lay your heart out, every 5 minutes, just tell someone how you feel, hug someone. No, what I am saying is know what your key messages are, and just be able to tell them, to your specific audience in a way that, one, they will understand, specific to them, but two, also that you don't come across as just some, strategic kind of person trying to get something out of them, that you're trying to be collaborative. So I hope I answered your question. It all depends on your audience, and it's up to you to find out more about them, and find out what works within their style, within their tone, and try it out. Yeah, try it out. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question here from Carly, and it's to all panelists. How would you manage the stress in your leadership team and the toxic effect that can have on the wider team?
I love that question.
We're all in the middle of this right now. So stress in the leadership team. I think, it's a few things really. I think, again, I'm a big fan of recognition. So I think the recognizing and the sort of naming it, is half the battle. And then I think, it's sort of down to your sense of who within the team you sense might feel similar, who's an ally or an ambassador for change. And I think I'm just going to lay out what my approach is, but you can kind of take it or leave it. But I think I always like to, look at a situation and see, if there are others, who feel similarly, and, use that as a way to sort of turn the tide, within a larger group. And, when you don't want everyone to necessarily be converted, but I think, it's a way to kind of, leverage others who feel the same to help change a situation. And I think, whenever a leadership team is stressed, they are conveying to the wider firm a level of uncertainty. And, I know we've been talking about being vulnerable and empathetic leaders, but there are times as a leader that you do need to kind of help shore things up. And, be a place where you're modeling, the best behavior. So, I think part of it is finding others who want to change that dynamic and being really honest about it and saying, hey, I know we're stressed, but in this moment, we have to, model a different way of handling this because it, permeates the entire group. I don't know if that kind of answers the question. Very open for others to jump in. On toxic leadership, I think we've all seen that in action.
I take a very different approach. I love hearing your perspective, Nicole. I might try your approach next time. I have a tendency to go not to find my allies, but to find where I find there's the greatest disconnect, and I try to address that head on in a non-confrontational way. I try to identify the things that are common denominators between myself and the party that I feel is disconnected from my point of view. And I start the conversation focused on those things. These are the outcomes or the things that we're focused on mutually. Let's identify where we're separate, where we're not seeing things the same way, and let's break it down into pieces and recognize that we might have individual or mutual accountability for improvement in those areas. So it's interesting, Nicole, to hear you talk about the ally approach. I don't want to say the enemy approach because that's never the case with leadership, but I try to reach across the line to folks that maybe have a different point of view and try and understand and fill in the gap of my understanding of what are they seeing or feeling or experiencing that I'm not, so that I can relate my positioning and what I'm trying to communicate to them in a way that they understand.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Carmel?
Sorry. I think for me, it's a mix between both. I think you need to find out what, for example, what the concerns are, and also find out, well, okay, what are the lessons learned? What are previous things that have already happened before that you can use some, for examples, and what can you use going forward? So
Thank you. I'm conscious of everyone's time, and there are still some phenomenal questions. So if you have sent a question in and it hasn't been answered, we will reach out to the panelists and get back to you, because there are some great future of work questions there. But I am conscious that you've all committed an hour of your schedule to this. So I would really like to end by going back to each of the panelists, because we did promise you all in this session that the learnings are about more than survival, that we do have an opportunity as individuals and professionally to learn, grow and thrive from these lessons. So to each panelist, I'm going to start with you. I'm doing alphabetical order to you, Carmel. What's the one thing that you'd ask everyone on this call in whatever capacity to do from today?
Okay, there's a few things, but the one thing, so if there's one thing you can do, I think from my perspective, I think I'm going to ask you to just set up just a 5-minute, a 2-minute, whatever you want, a 5-minute regular call with someone. And whenever you do, ask them 3 words. That's it. Just how are you? That's it. And what I would ask you to do is to answer that question yourself and get them to ask you the same question. And I think it's just about opening a bit of dialogue. And I don't mean, and I think we had that question before, you don't need to overshare, you don't need to say anything. You might be feeling on top of the world, doesn't matter. But I just think opening up and building up that amount of trust will also just help, one, with your well-being, and also, with your productivity, I think, and that's from my perspective.
Thank you, Carmel. Nicole?
Yeah, I think we all know this is a marathon, not a sprint. So for anyone out there who's really good at running, you've got those skills for this. I suppose the one thing, maybe I'll just tag on what Carmel is saying. When someone, that one person goes out and asks you how you are, you answer that question honestly. And I think that that's what I would say is, from a lot of the comments, we're all dealing with things physical, social, mental, that we compartmentalize, and we think, oh, we put on our Nicole professional suit and we come into work. We're the same person inside or outside the building, inside the office you haven't seen in 8 months, inside your home. So just bring that person with you wherever you are, and when you get asked how are you, on Carmel's good advice, answer it honestly.
Thank you, Nicole. Rhiannon?
It is a marathon, not a sprint, Nicole. I 100% agree. And they say, if you want to run fast, run alone. If you want to run far, run together. My bit of advice, ask for help. Ask for help for your own well-being, because you probably need it in some areas, and don't stop often enough to think where you might be able to. Ask for help because it deepens connections. We are generally programmed to want to help other people. And by helping other people, we feel a deeper connection to them. So you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the person that you're reaching out to, and the person, deepening the connection between the person, you and the person that's helping you. So I am trying to do more of this in a more mindful way, be conscious of what I can't do alone, and ask for help from my peers, from my team, from my loved ones.
Thank you so much, Rhiannon. Thank you to all 3 of you for sharing, but thank you for everyone that dialed into this. You carved out an hour where I know what your to-do list looks like. I know that, yeah, so I really appreciate that you put people first, that you carved out this hour. And talking about support and help, we at Happy Maven are continuing to offer our 30-minute free consultation. So if you've got any challenges around well-being, around leadership, around diversity or inclusion, please take advantage of that 30 minutes. And I promise it always starts with the question, how are you? And if that is all we talk about for 30 minutes, that's okay too. Thank you, Carmel. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Rhiannon. I could happily sit here for hours. Thank you, everybody who joined. We will be getting back in touch with everybody. If you'd like to stay in touch for future events, everyone stay well and have a lovely week. Thank you.
Thank you, Suki.
Thank you, everyone.